First of all, I think in order to talk about missile defense, I think it's important to kind of start off with why we care about missile defense. So where are we on the threat? What's the threat like? Well, we had a recent IAEA report that came out in May that showed, once again, that Iran is moving closer to a nuclear weapons capability. And it received very little attention in the media, and even in Congress it received some, but not a whole lot. A lot of that has just been, we've become kind of used to it. Yes, we know now that Iran is moving forward with this capability. We also know that Iran is moving forward with its long-range missile program, which it could then marry with a nuclear weapon and then threaten the United States. It already has missiles long enough to threaten our allies. Another thing that could, so knowing that, a lot of people then say, okay, well then what is the Obama administration doing on missile defense? The threat continues to steadily increase. What has the Obama administration done? Because we know that when he was running as a candidate, he said that he doesn't approve of missile defense. And so we weren't quite sure what he was going to do with the missile defense budget. We even feared that he could possibly cancel it altogether. He hasn't done that. In fact, he has funded the missile defense budget. And he's even fathered, he's kind of started some of these programs like the European Phase Adaptive Approach, this new program that would fold out missile defense programs in Europe and and then to protect the United States as well. So what has the Obama administration actually done? So I'd like to kind of paint a broad picture of that and then hopefully answer some questions about what it all means. Well, we remember when President Obama first came into office, he inherited the Bush administration's plan to place a third missile defense site in Poland and the Czech Republic. This is a third because we already have one in Alaska and one in California, and those are long-range systems that protect the United States from long-range missiles coming from North Korea and Iran. But originally those systems were to defend the United States from North Korean missiles headed towards the west coast of the United States. Bush administration realized that our system wasn't robust enough, wasn't as robust as he would like to defend the east coast of the United States from long-range missiles. So he had a plan to deploy a third site. It could be in the United States, or we could have a twofer and put it in Europe so that it would also defend United States allies from long-range Iranian missiles as well as the United States. President Obama inherited this program and did what many of us suspected he would do. He canceled the third site, in large part because the Russians objected to it for multiple reasons. One of the main reasons, they didn't want American defense systems in Europe. So the Russians, of course, are opposed to robust missile defense. They're opposed to any American missile defense, really, but they're really opposed to anything that has strategic significance. So they opposed that, and the Obama administration canceled that. But the Obama administration did admit the same thing that the Bush administration admit, that there was still a need to have added protection of the United States homeland. So when many people in Congress and the Senate and the House really were in an uproar over cancellation of this third site, something that our military commander said that we needed, something that the intelligence community said was necessary, the Obama administration said, but no, wait. I'm just going to do a different program, and it's called the European Phase Adaptive Approach. So he's going to roll out different missile defense systems in Europe over time, the last capstone piece being the fourth phase of the EPAA, and this would be the SM-3 Block 2B missile. It's a new missile, hadn't been created yet, but it was a new missile that would be even more robust than what the other system was going to be. It was going to be better, it was going to provide new capabilities, provide added protection of the United States homeland from Iranian ballistic missiles. Well, many of us were suspicious. Why would the Obama administration think that they could deploy a system that was more robust, more capable than the previous system, and the Russians would approve of this? The Russians would not approve of a system that was less capable. Why would they approve of a system that was more capable? So many of us were really suspicious that the Obama administration was actually going to develop and deploy this system. But we were interested to see how it was going to play out, because the threat was still there. They admitted that the need was still there for this system. And then we can't forget that right before this last presidential election, President Obama was caught on an open microphone talking to then Russian President Medvedev, saying, give me more space. Putin needs to give him more space, especially on the issue of missile defense. He needs some flexibility, because then after the election, read into that, when he wasn't held accountable by the American people about what he was going to do, then he can be more, he could have an agreement with Putin related to missile defense that the Russians would approve of. Of course, that implies that the president fully understands that this plan that he would move forward with the Russians would be something that the American people would not approve of. So, President Obama was reelected, and now we have Secretary Hagel, who's now leading the Pentagon, who is famous, I won't get into this, but very famous opponent of missile defense and one of the authors of the Global Zero report supporting the United States' leadership in ridding the world of nuclear weapons, of course, beginning with our own. And Secretary Hagel came out and gave a press conference that said that because North Korea was developing long-range missiles and they were being very belligerent at the time and firing off missiles and then threatening to fire them off, and Secretary Hagel said that now is the time that the United States needs to build up our missile defense system. So he's going to deploy more of these long interceptors that we have in Alaska, 14 of them. So he's going to make it, which is what the Bush administration had planned to do all along. The Obama administration never did. We're going to do this. We're going to improve missile defense. And oh, by the way, remember that program, the SM-32B, that we were planning on deploying in Europe? Turns out we're having some technical problems with it, and we're not going to deploy it. We're going to scale it back, which of course is, or we're going to restructure the program, which is Washington speak for cancel. So now this great, nifty missile that the Obama administration had used to buy time with those in Congress who care about national security and care about having a robust missile defense, bought time with them. And then many of us believe that this was used as this was a concession to the Russians, a unilateral concession in which the United States gained nothing in return, but now canceled this program. So we're back where we started when the Obama administration took office. We still have the same vulnerabilities to the homeland. Now we're going to have deployed more GBIs, which is going to be great. It's like having just more bullets in your gun to shoot at incoming missiles should there be an attack on the United States. But this vulnerability that the Bush administration said existed from Iranian missiles, and then that the Obama administration admitted existed because we needed the SM-32B to handle this threat, it still exists. So what is the Obama administration going to do about it? Well, Secretary Hagel said that they would look at that third site that the Bush administration had originally said they were going to look at it. Possibly, at the time, the Bush administration had looked at the East Coast, but then decided that Europe was better for protection of Europe and the United States. But Secretary Hagel said, we're going to look at this now East Coast of the United States for this third site. This is something that Congress had mandated. Look at the East Coast of the United States, do what they call an environmental impact study, look to see where this site could be, site study, and then see what would be necessary to deploy a site. So here we are now. The House of Representatives is finishing up consideration of the annual National Defense Authorization Act. And in this bill is a provision that the House Armed Services Committee approved, and now it's on the floor, that says that the president, or that the administration must, forget just studying, site studies of this third site. If the threat exists now, and if the threat is even worse than it was a few years ago, we need to actually deploy this system. So they have a provision that mandates that this site actually be deployed, I believe by 2018 was the date that they set for the actual deployment of the site. Well, you know, the administration puts out these statements of administration position on the defense bill, and one of the major objections that the administration has is this provision. They don't want to develop, they don't want to deploy this site. Now, and then we have Senator Levin here on the Senate side is actually one of the staunchest opponents of this third site, and so he's kind of pulling out all the stops to try to make sure that that this site isn't deployed and isn't developed and deployed. One of the things that Senator Levin just did, which I find dishonest, is he sent a letter to Admiral Searing, who's the director of the Missile Defense Agency, and he asked just very simple, straightforward questions. One of the questions he asked Admiral Searing is there a validated military requirement for this East Coast missile defense site? In which Admiral Searing replied, no, there's not. Now, this letter has had legs in the Senate now. It's getting a lot of attention because why would the United States waste our time at this point developing a system where there is no need for the system? Isn't that what that means? There's no validated military requirement. Actually, there's no validated military requirement for anything in the Missile Defense Agency. Because the entire Missile Defense Agency was created post 9/11 after President Bush got us out of the ABM treaty. A role of things such as validated military requirements. So it was a word game that Senator Levin played with Admiral Searing. Admiral Searing responded truthfully to the question, no, there's not, which has led people to believe that there's no need, even though this administration has said that this would greatly improve the capabilities of the United States missile defense system, and so did the previous administration. So we'll see. I do believe that it's going to pass in the House, and then we'll see what happens in the Senate. My guess is that there will not be a similar provision in the Senate, and then the two sides will go to conference, and there might be some compromise. That's my hope. At least, it looks like the administration being pressured to do something, since they have failed to do anything, that they might actually improve some radar capability. They might place more GBIs. And they might do some other things that would increase the systems we have, but they still will fall short of doing what's necessary to optimize the defense of the United States against Iranian missiles. And then on this last point, I did want to touch on what Frank alluded to, which is this, what does this have to do with the U.S. nuclear force? Well, I actually think it has everything to do with the U.S. nuclear force. That's how the administration sees it. So when the Senate passed the New START Treaty, one of the requirements that the Senate imposed on the administration said that they would pass this, they agreed to pass it, if the administration promised to what? To modernize U.S. nuclear weapons. You modernize the nuclear weapons, we'll agree to actually lower the ones we have. But you can't ask us to lower the ones we have and then also not upkeep the ones that we have, because then that's another way of disarming. You can disarm by actually lowering the numbers. You can disarm by atrophy. Just let the arsenal atrophy. So the administration said, yes, we will, and they're required by law to fulfill that promise. But did they provide the funds to modernize the U.S. nuclear force? No, they did not. So among other problems with this, one of the problems the administration now finds itself in is they're not going to get any treaty through the United States Senate. Their goodwill has been spent. And it looks like all of the Republicans, some of the Republicans that did support the New START Treaty because of this condition, have no stomach now to deal with another treaty going through the Senate. So what is an administration to do if they can't get a treaty through the Senate, even though they still want to go lower with the Russians on the U.S. nuclear force? They want to have another arms control deal. Well, they can do an executive agreement and just skirt the entire congressional process, approval process, just make an agreement with the Russian government that doesn't need to go through the Senate. That's their thinking, at least. Well, one of the things the Russians still oppose is American missile defense systems. So it appears as though the administration is poised to make some concessions again on U.S. missile defense in order to try to appease the Russians, to gain something out of the Russians for another executive agreement. The House and the Senate have both been working tirelessly to try to figure out what this deal might include. But there has really all of our information on this is coming out of the Russian press, because the Russians like to brag about advances they're making with the United States on getting things that they want. The Obama administration is a little bit more closed-lipped with the American people. The Russians like to brag about it. So we do know that they have been discussing with the Russians some particular options they might have to strike this deal. And in the meantime, the Congress is trying to get that information, and they'll see what they can do. But on my last point, I would just like to say, why hasn't this been making the news? And right now, the news is totally consumed with actions that this administration has done to completely erode the public trust. Story after story after story. My position is, if you look at what the administration is doing on security issues, it's exactly what they're doing on all the security issues. Missile defense is a perfect example of the Obama administration coming out saying they're going to do something and never intending to do it, in my opinion, or just failing to do it. And then, again and again. Okay, well, if we're not going to do this, we're going to do this, and then they don't do it. And now we actually see that they have total disregard for the process. and a disregard for Senate consent for what they're doing. So it's a serious problem, and I mean, the best thing that the Congress can do right now is to continue to put pressure on the administration, continue to ask questions about these situations, and pass a lot of the initiatives that what the House of Representatives has put forward.
Rebeccah, thank you very much. I've been told, I don't know if you can comment on this, if you've heard the same thing, that the administration actually has two versions of the speech that the President is expected to give in Berlin next week, one of which will reflect a deal with Putin, the other which will reflect no deal with Putin, but the same or similar cuts made unilaterally. Have you heard that as well? Do you expect that could come to pass?
I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen. I don't actually see what the administration could possibly do. What the Russians want. The Russians want a binding agreement. They don't want an agreement that's going to last this administration and then not stick with the next administration. So it's hard for me to imagine what the Russians could get out of the United States that would make them happy with that. But it wouldn't surprise me if the administration does have two versions of a speech they'd like.